Charlie Munger once said the first 100K is but you gotta do it. So in today's video, I'm sharing what you can do starting today to go from $0 to 100K in 2025. And it all starts with understanding this concept called the Pareto Principle. Basically, back in 1906, an economist called Pareto was working in his garden when he realized that about 80% of the healthy pea pods came from 20% of his pea plants. And later that day, he went back to his economic research laboratory and he started to notice something similar happening in countries. In Italy, he saw that about 80% of the land was owned by about 20% of the population. In England, about 70% of the total income was earned by about 30% of the people. Soon, Pareto realized that for many things, 20% of the causes lead to 80% of the results. For example, while you might have a closet full of clothes, you probably only wear about 20% of your clothes 80% of the time. Or in the case of money, for me, at least 80% of my YouTube ad revenue comes from about 20% of my videos. And just to be clear, it's not always going to be 80-20, it can be 70-30 or 60-40. But the point is, the majority of the results come from a minority of causes, and we're going to apply this concept to 3 fundamental contributors to wealth, which will help you achieve your 100K goal a lot faster. The first of the 3 fundamental contributors to wealth is understanding this concept called the flow of money. This means knowing how value moves from one person to another in the world, and then finding ways to use it to increase your income. And I'm going to use my Spider-Man wallet to explain this concept of flow of money because I recently got a lot of comments about it, which is great because this was my wallet for the longest time. But if you used it in the past, just let me know in the comments. I'm curious to see who else had this. So I want you to think about the chain of people involved in making this Spider-Man wallet, from the store that sold it to the logistics worker who shipped it to the store to the farmer who grows the cotton and that whole chain, right? The more value that someone brings to this chain, the more they can earn. For example, the farmer probably earns more than the store associate selling this wallet because they're the ones that are producing the materials needed to create this final product. And so the point is, the more value you contribute to the chain, the more you can make. And the easiest way for you to use this idea to increase your income is to apply it to the chain that you're already involved in, like at your full-time job. For example, at your job, you should understand the difference between effort and impact. And this personally took me a really long time to understand the distinction, which is one of my biggest regrets. So I just want to break it down for you really quickly. Let's just say that there are 2 workers, There's John and Amy, and both work hard, but they work hard in different ways. I'm going to describe the workday, and I just want you to pay close attention to exactly what they do. So John, the first person, shows up to work on time every day, 8 a.m. sharp, and he immediately checks his email and responds to everyone, He goes to every single meeting, he jots down all the notes, everything he has to do, and his list of to-do list gets really, really long. But he gets to every single task. He's always busy, he's always finishing his work, he's always doing his to-do list, and unfortunately, he has to work late every single night. But on the other hand, Amy, she shows up to work a little late pretty often, about 8:30, and the first thing she does is she reviews the most important metrics for her team and her company. She'll spend 15 minutes planning the things that she can do today that's gonna move the needle and move those metrics around. Amy takes forever to reply to your emails and oftentimes skips meetings and not even respond to people sometimes. She also has a long to-do list, but she prioritizes her task based on the most important metrics. She works a normal amount of hours and doesn't stay late at all. And I'm gonna admit, so I was pretty much John when I first started working in corporate America. I always thought that if I worked really, really hard and I did everything that was asked of me and I was a team player, that I would be rewarded for that. Hopefully I wasn't the only one that thought like this, so if you were also like this, let me know in the comments. But anyways, looking back now in retrospect, although I did a lot of everything, I'm not entirely sure how much I moved the needle on any one particular thing. Because on the other hand, Amy is more focused on impact. Although she works less hours and does fewer things, the impact that she has on the business is significantly larger. And I know what you might be thinking, There is always a place and time when working hard is just about effort. And yes, you're right. If you're just baking pizza, just bake more pizza. But it's different when it comes to corporate America in like an office setting. The truth is, money flows to where value is created. And if you're just putting in effort, you're probably mostly being reactive to whatever pops up, which leads to a lot of unfocused work. Whereas if you just focus on impact, you're focused on being intentional in getting closer to your team and company goals. And nowadays, I apply this concept with everything I do, right? I make sure I am focusing on my effort by applying the Pareto Principle to my list of tasks. And I'm sure we all have a big list of to-do lists. And most people, what they do is just go down their to-do list and just check everything off one by one. But for me, what I do now is I look at everything and I ask myself, which of the 20% of my task is going to produce 80% of the results? And then I only focus on those areas that have the highest return on my investment, right? So that I can align my day so I can give the most focus on the projects that pay the most or have the most impact and moves the needle the most. Which brings us to the second fundamental contributor to wealth, which is putting your resources to work in ways that can multiply over time. And this means identifying opportunities where you can use your additional income to build a more passive stream of income that doesn't require your direct effort. You see, I think a big problem in society for all of us is that, for most people, is that we were only taught how to make money with our direct effort. Right? With our work and labor, with our hours of work, like getting paid $40 to work for an hour or $20 or $10 or whatever. Now, there's nothing wrong with trading your hours for money, but the problem is, what if you don't want to work anymore? Or if you can't work anymore? You can't put in the labor anymore, you can't put the hours in, so how are you going to earn income that way? Now, that's the missing piece that we were never taught in our education system. I never learned it in school, my parents never taught it to me, and the unfortunate reality is, unless you grew up with money or people who were maybe very financially literate, we all have to go out of our ways to learn this concept, to make more money without using our direct effort or trading our labor for it, which is the whole idea of the Pareto Principle, right? To achieve more by doing less. And one way to do that is to start taking your income and using it and investing it into the stock market so it can compound over time. When you first start investing, it's kind of like rolling a small snowball down a hill. Eventually, it's going to get bigger and faster over time until it becomes a massive snowball. Meaning it doesn't matter if you only have $10 or $100 extra to invest. The reality is, the earlier you start investing, the more time your money can grow. But now the question is, what should you invest in? You see, for the average person, I suggest investing in a simple S&P 500 index fund, which tracks the 500 largest companies in the US. It's really easy to start and you can kind of just set it and forget about it. But if you're looking for more investment options, that's where I want to introduce today's sponsor, Walnut Fund, which is the first online agriculture investment platform that allows you to invest in fully managed walnut plantations. So basically, when you invest through the Walnut Fund, they'll use your money to set up walnut plantations. And so far, they planted about 12,000 walnut trees in Europe, and they're starting a big new farm with room for over 25,000 new walnut trees, which is going to be their biggest walnut orchard so far. Even the German TV channel Galileo made a short documentary about them. What's helpful is that the Walnut Fund handles all the costs and work of the plantation, so you don't have to worry about any of that. And the cool thing is, when the plantation produces the walnuts, they'll reimburse you your initial investments, and then you share all future profits 50-50 with the Walnut Fund. And according to the Walnut Fund, most people start seeing returns around the 4th year and expect to make passive income each year for the next 35 years. If you're interested, check out the Walnut Fund with the link below, and thanks again to the Walnut Fund for sponsoring this video. And moving on to the third fundamental contributor to wealth, and that is to be fully aware of your relationship with money, which means knowing your expenses and finding ways to live below your means so that you have enough money left over to save or to invest. And a pattern that I start to notice that a lot of people underestimate the importance of this next contributor, because many people think that the first 100K comes from just earning a lot of money. But your savings, I argue, your savings can play an even bigger role. You see, if your salary is 200K a year, but you spend it all, then you have nothing left over. You can only invest with what you have left over. But that doesn't mean you need to deprive yourself and live like you're on the Extreme Cheapskates TV show. And personally, I don't think depriving yourself to save money actually works in the long run. In fact, it might be counterintuitive. Like if you take diets, for example, a majority of diets fail because of the forbidden fruit effect. Basically, the more you're told to avoid something, like a slice of pineapple pizza or spending money or whatever, the more you actually want it, which isn't really helpful. Instead, the best way to live below your means without depriving yourself is to apply the Pareto Principle to your expenses. For example, if you list out all your expense categories like your housing, your transportation, your food, entertainment, insurance, etc., and you also list out their cost, you're gonna notice that 80% of your total expenses come from about 20% of your expense categories. And very likely it's the housing, transportation, and insurance one. And the Pareto Principle states it's more effective and easier to reduce these 20% of your biggest expense categories that contribute to most of your spending cost than trying to reduce 80% of the smaller categories like your entertainment or your Netflix subscription. So if your total expenses for the month is, let's just say, $6,000, right? 80% or $4,800 of that expenses is coming from 20% of the categories, and the remaining 20% or $1,200 of the expenses is coming from the 80% of the remaining categories. So let's say you want to save $600 somewhere, right, out of your budget. It would be much easier for you to save the $600 from the $4,800 expenses rather than from the $1,200 expenses. So just ask yourself, right, for your housing expenses, can you refinance your mortgage at a better interest rate or move to a lower cost of living city while keeping your current job and salary? For transportation, can you trade in for a more affordable car? For insurance, can you compare rates and switch to something that costs less? And although this seems like a lot of upfront work, right, and it seems easier to just cancel a Netflix subscription to save money, this is only gonna save you so much, right? For example, cutting a $15 monthly subscription saves you $180 a year. But moving to a slightly smaller apartment and paying $200 less in rent can save you $2,400 per year. The point is, focusing on bigger items allows you to save more without having to spend more time or effort micromanaging smaller purchases. But more importantly, studies show that willpower is limited in us, and your environment is guilty of depleting it even if you're not consciously noticing it. Meaning, if you have ice cream, a bowl of ice cream sitting on your desk, and you are consistently trying to resist it, that becomes really exhausting, and you'll actually be less successful at other tasks that day. Like you'll probably blame yourself for failing X, Y, and Z later on that day, when in reality, it was that bowl of ice cream sabotaging you. The same concept applies when you try to micromanage all your small purchases. Each thing you focus on that doesn't move the needle in your savings still requires mental willpower to do. So the point is, focus on impact, not effort. And that leads me to something that you've got to start accepting. As someone who's worked in finance for over 8 years, I can now recognize the signs that determine whether someone is going to be rich or not. So if you really want to get rich, like that's your goal, you want to click here to learn the 9 signs on whether or not you're going to be rich to see if you're doing them or not.